Her voice cut through the cheerful music of the reception like a shard of broken glass. "What are you still doing here?" I saw my son's new bride, Chloe. Her face, framed by a delicate veil, was twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her champagne flute. "I told my husband you were uninvited. Security." She snapped her fingers at a guard standing near the door, her voice becoming shriller with every word. "Get her out of my wedding, now!" The room fell silent. The music screeched to a halt. Hundreds of pairs of eyes turned to stare, and I could feel the heat of their collective embarrassment and shock. But inside, I felt nothing but a strange, icy calm. I had been waiting for this moment. I simply nodded, and gave her a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'll go," I said, and my voice was steady, carrying across the silent room with perfect clarity. "But before that, let me introduce my guest, someone you know very well." The moment she saw who walked through that door, her face turned a shade of white I'd never seen before. But to understand the beautiful, poetic justice of her collapse, you need to know how we got here. Welcome to Granny's Secret. If you believe a mother's intuition is the most powerful force on earth, take a moment to subscribe to our family. Now, here's the lie she built her entire world on. Before Chloe, the world I lived in was built on truth. It was a small world, sometimes a difficult one, but it was sturdy, and it was ours. It was the world my son Leo and I built from the ashes of the one that collapsed the day I lost my husband. When John died, Leo was only 16. The silence in our little house was deafening. John had been a man with a booming laugh and a presence that filled every room. Without him, the world felt grey and unsteady. In those first few months, Leo and I were like two ships lost in a fog, circling each other, too wrapped up in our own grief to be much help. But slowly, we found our way. He started making me coffee in the mornings, the way his dad used to. I started going to all his football games, sitting in the bleachers with a book, just so he'd know I was there. We became a team. He was my rock, and I was his. Our little world of two was founded on a simple promise: we would always, always have each other's backs. As Leo grew into a man, he inherited his father's best qualities: his kindness, his integrity, and his enormous, beautiful dreams. Leo didn't just want a job, he wanted to build things. He'd spend hours at the kitchen table, sketching magnificent buildings on napkins, his eyes alive with a passion that reminded me so much of John. His dream was to found his own architectural design firm, a company that would create beautiful, sustainable spaces for families. It was a wonderful dream, but dreams, as we all know, cost money. The banks wouldn't even look at him. No experience, they'd say. No collateral. I watched the light in his eyes start to dim with every rejection letter. I saw him starting to believe that maybe his dream was too big. And I just couldn't let that happen. A mother can bear her own disappointments, but she cannot bear to watch her child's spirit break. So, I did the one thing I swore I'd never do. I sold the Duke. The Duke was a 1967 Ford Mustang, cherry red with a white leather interior. It was my husband's pride and joy. He'd spent 10 years restoring it in our garage, piece by piece. Every Saturday, he'd be out there, covered in grease, whistling along to the radio. Our first real date was in that car. He drove me to the coast, the top down, with the wind whipping through my hair. He proposed to me in the front seat of that car, right after we'd shared a hot dog at a drive-in movie. After he was gone, sitting in that car was the closest I could get to feeling him beside me. The scent of old leather and his favorite air freshener was like a ghost of his embrace. It was the last, most tangible piece of him I had left. The day I sold it, I felt like I was betraying him. I drove it to the collector's garage myself, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I remembered John's hands on that same wheel. I remembered his laugh echoing in that small space. When I signed the title over, a single hot tear rolled down my cheek and splashed onto the paper, smudging the ink. The man handed me a check for $65,000. It felt like the heaviest and emptiest thing I've ever had in my life. I didn't tell Leo where the money came from. I just told him it was an investment from someone who believed in him. That money was the seed, but it wasn't enough. To really get the business off the ground, for the software, the office space, the insurance, he needed more. So I went to my savings account. The money I had carefully put away for 25 years. Money that should have been for my retirement. It was my safety net, my peace of mind fund, my little dream of one day taking a cruise to Alaska and seeing the glaciers. I looked at my bank statement, at the number that represented a lifetime of careful planning, and I didn't hesitate. I walked into the bank and withdrew another $40,000. My nest egg, the future I had planned for myself, was gone in a single transaction. I transferred it all into the account for Leo Designs LLC. My future wasn't as important as his. For the next 3 years, my life was not mine. It belonged to his dream. I became his unpaid secretary, his bookkeeper, his late-night coffee maker. My little garden grew weeds because I was at his tiny office, answering phones. I learned how to use invoicing software. I learned how to package and mail enormous blueprint drawings. Most nights he'd be at his drafting table until 3 a.m., his face pale with exhaustion, and I'd be there with him, making sandwiches, offering encouragement, and cleaning up the coffee cups he'd left scattered around. I put my life, my friends, my hobbies, everything on hold, and I did it gladly. Because with every new client he got, with every successful project, the light in his eyes grew brighter. Seeing him succeed was my reward. It was all I ever needed. And one day he brought Chloe home. The first time I saw her, she stepped out of a sleek black car wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. Polished and perfect, like a doll from a fancy store window. She handed me a bouquet of orchids so large and elaborate it felt less like a gift and more like a statement. She smiled, a dazzlingly white and perfectly practiced smile, and said all the right things. But when I looked into her eyes, I felt a sudden, unmistakable chill. It was a feeling deep in my gut, a primal instinct a mother has. She looked at my son, my kind, trusting Leo, not with love, but with calculation. It was the look of a miner who had just struck gold. And she too blinded my boy, my brilliant, kind-hearted boy, to see the pickaxe in her hand. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself I was being a jealous, overprotective mother. I wanted to like her for Leo's sake. I truly did. But the red flags started piling up, one after another. Impossible to ignore. She claimed to come from a wealthy family in Connecticut, but she never once suggested we visit them. When I asked to see photos of her parents, she'd always change the subject. She had a consulting job that was incredibly vague, involving lots of important calls she had to take in another room, her voice a low, secretive whisper. Then there were the business trips. Every month or two she'd fly to Miami for a conference. She'd post nothing about it online, her social media always strangely private for someone so outgoing. It just didn't add up. I tried to talk to Leo gently at first. It's just a little strange, honey, I'd say, that she's so secretive about her family. His reaction was immediate and fierce. You're just looking for problems, Mom, he'd snap back, his voice tight with frustration. You've never given her a chance. You're jealous that I have someone else in my life. His words hurt more than he could ever know. Jealous? I had poured my entire life into his happiness. All I wanted was to protect it. But the more I questioned, the more he pulled away, and the tighter Chloe wrapped herself around him. She was an expert at positioning me as the villain, the overbearing mother who couldn't let her son go. He started calling less. He stopped dropping by for dinner. The small, sturdy world we had built for two was being systematically demolished by a woman who wouldn't even show me a picture of her own mother. Then came the engagement, and the wedding planning began. A ridiculously lavish affair that I knew Leo was stretching himself thin to pay for. I held my tongue, determined to be supportive for his sake. I bought a beautiful dress, a soft blue one, and I looked forward to the day hoping that seeing him happy would finally silence the alarm bells ringing in my head. The night before the wedding, I was home, carefully pressing the dress. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I smiled, thinking it was Leo calling for a last-minute pep talk. It wasn't. It was a text message from Chloe. My hands started to shake as I read the words on the screen. Each one was a tiny, sharp icicle stabbing into my heart. Eleanor, Leo and I have been talking, and we've made a difficult decision. To ensure the day is purely about our union and our future, we feel it would be best if you didn't attend the wedding. Your presence tends to be a bit overwhelming for him. We need to start our new life without old attachments getting in the way. Please respect our wishes. We'll mail you a piece of cake. Old attachments. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the tiled floor. The sound echoed in the silent kitchen. I sank into a chair, the breath knocked out of me as if I'd been punched. I wasn't angry. The feeling was something far deeper and hollow than anger. It was a profound, crushing hurt. My mind replayed a slideshow of my sacrifices. The sight of my husband's beloved Mustang driving away forever. The zero balance on my retirement account statement. The thousands of late nights. The endless cups of coffee. The garden I let die so his dream could live. All of it. All so he could have this life, this success, this wedding. The wedding my Mustang paid for. The suit on my son's back that my nest egg bought. And I was an old attachment. A piece of baggage to be discarded. They would mail me a piece of cake. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I sat there in the dark, the smell of the steam from the iron hanging in the air, and felt the sturdy little world I had built for my son crumble into dust around me. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark, watching the shadows in my living room shift, as the moon made its slow journey across the sky. When the sun finally rose, its cheerful morning light felt like an insult. It was the day of my son's wedding. One day I was supposed to be filled with joy. Instead, my heart felt like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The beautiful blue dress I'd bought was hanging on the door of my wardrobe. It looked like a ghost of the happiness I was supposed to feel. I walked over and touched the soft fabric of the sleeve, my fingers tracing the delicate embroidery. I felt nothing. The pain from the night before had subsided into a vast empty numbness. I was defeated. Chloe had won. She had taken my son, and now she had taken this day from me too. The embossed wedding invitation was on the coffee table, mocking me with its elegant script. I had no fight left in me. I just wanted to pull the curtains, crawl into bed, and make the world go away. But the silence was too much to bear. I needed to hear a friendly voice, a voice that connected me to a time before all this. I picked up my phone, my fingers scrolling numbly through my contacts until I found the name Frank. Frank was my late husband's best friend. A retired private investigator with sharp eyes but a kind, gentle soul. He was a link to John, a living piece of my past. I didn't call him for help or advice. I just needed to tell someone what happened, to make it real, to hear myself say the words out loud. He took the second ring. "Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. You must be over the moon today." His cheerful voice broke something in me, and the whole story just came pouring out. The text message, the cruelty, the heartbreak. I wasn't crying. My voice was flat and dead as I recounted it all. Frank listened patiently, his silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. To explain how deep the wound was, I even found myself rambling about Chloe's odd behavior over the years. "It never felt right, Frank," I said, my voice barely a whisper. All her secrets, and all those strange business trips to Miami. She always said her company had a conference. But who has a conference every other month in the same city? I said it as a throwaway line, just another piece of the confusing puzzle. But on the other end of the phone, there was a sudden shift. The comforting friend was gone, and the investigator had taken his place. "Miami?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "Eleanor, Do you remember the exact dates of any of those trips? I was taken aback. I think so. There was one in July, right around my birthday. I could hear him typing on a keyboard. And she was always vague about the details? Always, I confirmed. It was just consulting work. Leo told me to stop asking questions. Frank went quiet for a long moment. The silence was different now. It was tense, charged. "Eleanor," he said finally, his voice low and serious. "I have a hunch. It's a long shot, but I know some people down in that part of the country. Can you give me an hour?" An hour later, my phone rang again. I answered with a trembling hand. "Frank." "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was grim. "Her name isn't the only thing she lied about. She's not a consultant, she's a professional, and my sources tell me her Miami benefactor thinks she's on a yoga retreat in Bali this weekend. He has no idea she's getting married. His name is Alistair Sterling, and I have his number." My mind couldn't process the words. "Benefactor? What are you talking about?" Just then, my phone buzzed with an incoming picture message from him. I opened it. It was a photo of Chloe, laughing, on the deck of a massive, gleaming yacht. She was leaning against a much older, wealthy-looking man, her hand resting comfortably on his chest. The timestamp on the photo was from the weekend in July she was supposedly at a conference. Staring at that picture, something inside me broke. But it didn't spill like tears. The hurt, the sadness, the profound numbness. It all vanished. It was burned away in a sudden, white-hot flash, leaving something cold and hard and clear in its place. The woman in that picture wasn't just a liar. She was a predator, and she was about to ruin my son's life. The hurt vanished. The tears dried up. In their place, a clarity I hadn't felt in years settled over me. Frank thought he was giving me information for a divorce lawyer. He was wrong. He had just handed me the guest of honor for my son's wedding. I stood up from the couch. My movements were no longer slow and defeated. They were sharp, deliberate. I walked to my wardrobe and took down the blue dress. It was no longer a stolen invitation or a broken heart. This was about saving my son. This was about justice. I walked to the small bowl by the door and picked up my car keys. Their familiar jingle was the most beautiful sound in the world. My hand was steady as I dialed the number Frank had given me. There were no more tears, no more trembling. There was only the cold, hard weight of purpose. The phone rang 3 times before a man with a smooth, impatient voice answered. "Sterling? Mr. Sterling," I began, keeping my own voice level and professional, as if I were calling to discuss a stock portfolio. "My name is Eleanor Gable. I'm a concerned business associate of a young woman you know. A Miss Chloe Green." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of ocean waves in the background, the clinking of ice in a glass. "I don't know any business associates of hers," he said, his tone dismissive and bored. "She's on a retreat in Bali. If you have a message, leave it with my assistant." He was about to hang up. I had one shot. "She's not in Bali, Mr. Sterling," I said clearly. "She's in a ballroom at the Oak Ridge Country Club. It's for Leo's wedding." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The gentle sound of the waves stopped. I imagined him standing on a sun-drenched balcony in some Miami penthouse. The phone pressed to his ear, his world tilting on its axis. When he finally spoke, the boredom was gone, replaced by a dangerous, quiet fury. "What did you just say?" "I think you heard me," I replied calmly. "Chloe is getting married today. To my son. That's impossible." "It's a lie," he hissed, but the conviction in his voice was already crumbling. He was a man used to being in control, and the idea of being played for a fool was something his ego couldn't stomach. "Is it?" I asked. "I'm sending you a link. You tell me if it's a lie." My fingers moved quickly, texting him the address to Leo and Chloe's wedding website. It was full of professionally taken photos. The two of them laughing in a park, holding hands, looking deeply in love. It was a perfectly crafted illusion of happiness. I held the phone to my ear, listening in silence, waiting. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then, I heard it. sharp, violent crash. The unmistakable sound of a heavy crystal glass being thrown against a wall and shattering into 1,000 pieces. The proof had landed. The lie was exposed. "I'm 1 hour away," he growled, his voice a low thunder. "I'm taking my helicopter." "Where is this place?" I gave him the address. A plan formed, swift and perfect in my mind. "Don't come straight in," I instructed, my own voice taking on a new authority. "Wait for my signal. I'll go in first. When I text you the word now, you walk in." "I'll be there," he promised, and the line went dead. The drive to the country club was the longest 45 minutes of my life. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart was pounding my ribs. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was an instrument of justice. I was a storm cloud rolling in over a sunny garden party, and I was about to unleash a hurricane. With every mile that passed, I imagined Sterling's helicopter slicing through the air, a symbol of the terrible, swift truth that was flying to meet us. My quiet drive and his thundering flight were two parts of the same mission: to save my son. I pulled up to the grand entrance and handed my keys to the valet, who looked at me with a flicker of confusion, probably wondering why a guest was arriving so late. I didn't care. I walked up the marble steps, my head held high. The moment I stepped through the grand doors into the reception hall, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. I was a ghost at the feast. I saw my son Leo, standing near the towering wedding cake. His eyes met mine, and his face was a painful mixture of shock, guilt and relief. He took a step toward me, his mouth opening to say my name, but he was too late. Chloe, like a hawk spotting a mouse, swooped in between us. Her perfect smile was gone, replaced by a snarl. This was the moment. The scene from my nightmares. The one I had replayed in my mind 100 times. "What are you still doing here?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. The band's cheerful music faltered, and then stopped completely. "I told my husband you were uninvited. Security." She snapped her fingers at a guard. "Get her out of my wedding. Now." Leo looked horrified, trapped between the woman he loved and the mother who raised him. The guests stared, their faces a gallery of shock and pity. But I just looked at Chloe, at this beautiful poisonous viper in a $5,000 wedding dress, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear focus. I pulled my phone from my clutch, and with my thumb, I typed and sent a single word to Alistair Sterling. "Now." I gave Chloe that same small, tight smile from my imagination. "I'll go," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "But before that, let me introduce my guest. Someone you know very well." Chloe's face contorted with confusion. "What are you talking about? What guest?" And then the grand doors reopened. A man entered, and he commanded the room without saying a word. Alistair Sterling was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair lending him an air of distinguished power. His face was a mask of cold fury, and his eyes were locked on only one person: Chloe. I watched her face. It was a slow-motion masterpiece of destruction. The angry red of her rage slowly drained away, replaced by the stark, waxy white of pure terror. Her jaw went slack. Her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent gasp. She recognized him, and in that single moment of recognition, she knew her entire world was over. The room held its breath. Sterling walked slowly, deliberately across the marble floor, his expensive shoes clicking, with a sound like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of Chloe's life. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her. He looked down at her white dress, a cruel smile touching his lips. "A yoga retreat in Bali, darling?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. He then turned his cold eyes to my son. "I do apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "I'm Alistair Sterling." He gestured vaguely at Chloe, who looked like she was about to be sick. "I paid for the dress she's wearing, the apartment she lives in, and the car she drives. I was under the impression we were exclusive." He looked back at Leo, his eyes filled with a sort of pity. You must be the side project." A collective gasp went through the room. Leo stared, his face ashen, looking from the powerful stranger to the terrified woman beside him, and then to me. I saw the gears turning in his mind, the secret phone calls, the trips to Miami, my unanswered questions. The truth was hitting him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Chloe stammered, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Alistair, this isn't... I can explain." "Can you?" Sterling said with a voice as cold as ice. "Son," he said, looking at Leo again, "I'm sorry for your trouble. But thank your mother. She just saved you from a woman who measures love in quarterly wire transfers." That was it. That was the final blow. Chloe's eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. And with a soft, pathetic little sigh, she crumpled to the floor in a heap of white lace and shattered lies, completely unconscious. Chaos erupted. Guests were shouting. Her parents were rushing forward. Leo stood frozen, a statue of heartbreak, staring down at the woman he thought he knew. And I just watched. I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a quiet, grim finality. The fire I had started to save my son had finally burned the monster to the ground. The moments after Chloe collapsed were a blur of ugly, frantic noise. Her mother was shrieking. Her father's face was a mask of fury and shame as he helped a now conscious and sobbing Chloe to her feet. They hustled her out a side door without a single backwards glance. Alistair Sterling didn't stay long. He walked over to my son, who was still standing frozen amidst the wreckage, and spoke a few firm, quiet words to him, before turning and leaving as silently as he had arrived. The guests, not knowing what else to do, began to gather their things and melt away, their whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Soon, the grand ballroom was empty. It was just me and Leo, alone in a sea of abandoned tables, half-eaten cake, and wilting flowers. The silence was heavier than the noise had been. I watched my son, my strong, brilliant boy, as he finally folded, his shoulders slumped, and a sound of pure, ragged heartbreak escaped his lips. He sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. I approached him, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything at all. I just pulled up a chair beside him, wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders, and held him. I held him as he cried for the love he thought he had, for the future that had turned out to be a lie, for the deep, painful humiliation of it all. In that quiet, ruined ballroom, we were a team of two again, picking up the pieces. The months that followed weren't easy. Healing from such betrayal is a slow, messy business. Leo started seeing a therapist to help him work through the anger and the grief. There were endless phone calls with lawyers, trying to untangle the financial web Chloe had woven, separating his legitimate business funds from the money she had conned out of both him and Sterling. It was a stressful, exhausting process. But through it all, something beautiful was happening. We were finding our way back to each other. I'd dropped by his office with soup, and he'd actually stopped working to eat with me. We started having coffee at my kitchen table on Sunday mornings, just like we used to. At first, we didn't talk about what happened. We just sat in the comfortable silence, rebuilding the bridge between us one quiet moment at a time. One morning, he looked at me across the table, his eyes clear for the first time in a long time. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She told me you were trying to control my life, that you were jealous." He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "But you weren't. You were trying to save it." "I'm so sorry I didn't listen." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're my son, Leo," I whispered. "There's nothing to forgive." About a year after the wedding that wasn't, Leo asked me to go with him to a classic car show. The sun was warm, and the field was filled with gleaming chrome and the low, happy rumble of restored engines. We wandered for a while, and then he led me toward a familiar shape. It was a 1967 Ford Mustang, cherry red, with a white leather interior. It was a perfect copy of the Duke. I just stared, my hand flying to my mouth. "Leo," I breathed. It's beautiful. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. The business is finally back on solid ground, he said. The lawyers got a lot of money. This was the first thing I wanted to do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single gleaming key. He placed it in my hand. "It's yours." Tears streamed down my face. But for the first time in a long, long time, they were tears of pure joy. The car was wonderful, but that wasn't the point. It was never about the money or the things I had given up. It was about this moment, this gesture, this proof that my son was whole again, that he was safe, and that our bond was stronger than any lie. In the end, I didn't win anything that day at the wedding. I simply refused to lose my son. I had sold my husband's car to give him a future, and I would have driven it through the gates of hell to protect that future from being stolen. Some people might call what I did revenge. A mother simply calls it love. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If you believe in the power of truth, I hope you'll join our family by subscribing. Thanks for reading.